What's going on, Badger Nation?
Yes, you got it. Welcome, Badger Nation, to another episode of the PPC Den podcast, your home for all things Amazon tips, tricks, and PPC strategy. Today, I am very blessed to be joined by Destaney from BetterAMS, calling in all the way from Arkansas. Destaney, how are you doing today?
I am doing incredible. Very excited to be here.
Yes, and your audio sounds so crisp and good. What's your secret?
If anyone has issues, Michael knows what's going on. He gave me the immediate feedback and 50% ROI immediately.
Big win. So I hope our voices aren't too soothing, that it puts you in a too relaxed of a state that you fall asleep, because today we're going to be talking about a very important topic. And it's funny because we talked about this topic on the show about a year ago. Thank you so much for coming back. We love having you. I know our audience does too. But we talked about this a year ago. And when we were going back and forth about what should we be talking about today, I was like, hey, have your thoughts changed on Total ACOS? And you're like, mm-hmm. And this is the inception point for this episode. So I don't know if you remember, but a year ago, we both kind of agreed that if you're tracking Total ACOS like too granularly on a per product basis, you're like missing the point. And for so many reasons, it was imperfect to track. You couldn't track it. Like, how do you track sponsored brands Total ACOS? It wasn't perfect. And we were both kind of in agreement about it. However, our thoughts have evolved a little bit, and we thought it was worth it updating the show. So why did this topic sort of call out to you today?
One, I believe that there's been a huge change in the industry and we've all seen it. A lot of us have been in the space for a long time, but at the end of the day, things are getting so much more competitive. And in order to justify spending more money on the platform when you're getting less return, you have to have more data. And I think that's fundamentally where we started transitioning into our thoughts around TACOS, but that's the core of it. I have a few other ideas, but I'll let you go.
Yeah. So I just feel like in the last few months, probably 6 months, I've started to really rethink what reporting we do for our clients, what reporting when I'm coaching people who are working with others, and they're asking me like, hey, how should I be interacting with my Amazon PPC person? What I used to tell them has evolved too. And these days I am absolutely advocating for, Total ACOS reporting. And I'll talk about how I like to do it and how we do it over here at iBadger. I'm curious to hear how you guys do it over there at BetterAMS too. But I think it's evolved and it's become really good. And it's actually feels really good to do this kind of reporting. And it feels really good to have an idea and then have new information come in and evolve and grow from it. So I'm super stoked that we both came to this conclusion independently of one another, that it's like, hey, maybe it's time that we change up the way that reporting gets done, and there's been some benefits to it. So go into that, go into a little bit about how that changed for you. Because when you first were doing Amazon PPC management, I take it you were not doing Total ACOS reporting. Neither were we. Yeah. So I take it you weren't. So, and now you are. So what has sort of evolved?
I think the organic side of the industry has become a much bigger discussion. We've seen a change in terms of service. So rank manipulation is out the window. That means getting ranked on page one is so much harder than it used to be, because if you look at any main keyword, you're seeing really historical legacy products on page one. It's very high review counts, which makes it hard to compete because you can't go out and get thousands of reviews within 48 hours like you used to. You can't do giveaways that are going to put you up on page one really quickly. So when organic is a lot harder to accomplish, TACOS becomes all the more important, because TACOS is your advertising sales divided by your total sales. So what we started seeing with COVID and cost per clicks and supply chain issues is our brands would have their products go out of stock, and then they'd go back in stock, and it'd be like, well, we're just not seeing the same number that we used to be. Why are my sales down? Why are my sales down? And we would have to be like, well, what are you doing to rank? Well, we're not doing much. And then we'd be having to have the conversation around spending more money on ads to justify that. And the real amazing metric and the best KPI to see is when you spend an additional $1,000 on ads, your organic sales increase. So it's not necessarily that short of a correlation, but when we were looking at TACOS, that's what really painted the full picture for us. We needed to see that we're spending more money on ads and our organic sales are increasing. So that's why we started breaking it down on a much more specific level.
For sure. It's this concept of like the evolving role of digital marketing in general, and also the evolving role of Amazon marketing, the evolving role of like PPC management on Amazon. And a couple of weeks back, I was talking about how, total ACOS, your ad cost over your total sales, isn't necessarily a PPC metric, which is why I assume, a lot of PPCers didn't report on it years and years ago. And it's not totally an organic metric either. And it's this kind of thing that is influenced by both. So spot on, totally resonate with you on all of that. So let's talk about like systems, because I, love giving like tactical things that people can go out there and implement on a regular basis. So in terms of like reporting, I'd love to hear about your, now that we've sort of established some of that thought process on why it's become more front and center for PPCers to talk about and report to with their clients, like what is that system? Like what does that feedback loop look like? Like if somebody comes to you completely fresh and they're like, hey, BetterAMS, I'd love it if you guys took a look at my campaigns. Like, should we work together? Can you help me? What are some things that you noticed about their total ACOS? And like, do you work that into the conversation? And how does that play out over the coming weeks and months?
So TACOS is truly probably one of the top 5 most important metrics I look at when I'm auditing a brand. And the reason being is if someone comes to me with a TACOS that's higher than usually like 12 to 15%, that is an indicator that something is probably not running well within the overall brand. It's usually one, they're being over leveraged in ads. So they have a really poor PPC manager that's just hemorrhaging spend in areas that shouldn't be. Or what I've been seeing more often, it means that their organic ranking has slipped over time. So they're not sending the appropriate traffic to their listing, which means they're having to rely on advertising, and they're just kind of in this cycle of being over leveraged. On the flip side, if I audit a brand and see their TACOS is less than 5%, I'm like, this is an account I probably want because you have a lot of money being left on the table because they're not using ads, which means they're organically in a very, very strong spot. So they probably have an amazing brand. So that's kind of the first thing that we usually look at.
One, like this is almost like a side question, but like that, prospect that came to you that was like, hey, can you take a look at my account? And you're like, whoa, you've got a 15, 20% total ACOS. What do you think that campaign manager is doing wrong? Like, what would be your guess that they're like, what is their biggest mistake that they're making? Because maybe that person's like listening to the show to try to get better. So like if somebody is way up there, like what do you think is the biggest problem in their PPC?
One of the first places I'll go is brand metrics within Advertising Console, and I will open up the subcategory of the main volume products, and I will see how we're converting relative to our category average and our best sellers. Mm-hmm. The reason I want to look at brand metrics conversion rate is because it's giving me organic and advertising combined. So I'm going to look at there. And if I see I'm converting really well within my industry average, then I'm probably going to assume that, again, PPC is over leveraged, which usually comes from poor bid optimization. They have very, very high bids on things they're not converting well on, and then just way too much going on. They're just spending money anywhere and everywhere without a lot of strategy behind it. Now, if I go in and I see that in brand metrics, our conversion rate is much worse than everyone else, it's usually an indicator that they're not able to get ranked because they're converting so poorly. So that means that the majority of their sales are going to have to come from ads because they're not on the top of page 1. So if that's the case, then it's a brand issue of let's fix your conversion rate and then drive more money to your listings so that way you can take advantage of that volume.
Some really good things there. So let me try to just confirm and break that down because there was so much value there. If somebody does have like a totally out of control total ACOS, like it's way up there in 20%, I'd love the fact that you're going to brand metrics first to get a holistic view of how the company is doing relative to the industry, like what is their conversion rate relative to the industry, which could be so revealing. And already like you could start to see like more and more dots get connected here. As you start digging in, you start to like the evolving role of like a PPC, or it's like years ago, like 3-5 years ago, like conversion rate wasn't front and center so much, because it doesn't really matter if you're getting clicks for like 15 cents. You can get away with a pretty below average conversion rate. I remember like being in college, like Googling something, and like I remember I was searching something for school, and then I saw an ad for like win a free iPhone, like advertised on Google. And I just remember, and like wasn't until years later when I got into like the world of PPC, like right after college, where I was like, wait a second, like on Google, people are just like running ads for like win a free iPhone. And it doesn't even matter what percentage of people fill it out, because the clicks are so crazy cheap. Like you can like be bidding on like baseball scores and then just hit somebody with a win a free iPhone ad like years and years ago, because the clicks were just so cheap. And like in a short time, Amazon went from like, hey, our clicks are so cheap, conversion rate, you can kind of get away with a below average one, to, oh, clicks are way more expensive now. Like you're going to get punished if you have a bad conversion rate.
Yeah, 100%. You're going to spend a lot of money that doesn't convert. I mean, the amount of volume that's on Amazon is absolutely insane right now. So even in niche categories, you're probably going to get quite a few clicks. And if you're not converting on those clicks, then you're just spending money for no reason.
Yeah. You know, I've heard this is an old school PPC saying, it's like the goal of PPC isn't to spend the least, it's to be able to spend the most profitably. Meaning if you could just go into your account tomorrow and turn every bid to $100, and, you know, you had an absurd conversion rate, like you would be annihilating your competition. Like that's a very extreme example, but a lot of times whenever we feel a pinch of like rising CPCs and like need to make decisions about scaling things back like dramatically, this is generally indicative of a conversion rate issue.
A really good point you have is when or what it looks like to scale things back, because that's kind of the knee-jerk reaction I feel like I've seen the most in the industry, because out of stock, supply chain, all of that has affected organic ranking. Terms of service changes have affected our ability to get organically ranked. Having more historical products that got in on Amazon 5 years ago are making it a lot harder to get in the top 4. Yep. So when brands are saying, oh, my TACOS is way too high, they're cutting back on ads. And what's happening is advertising was the number one traffic source they had. So even though they're making more money in that short period of time because their TACOS is decreased, when you cut the majority of your volume that's being driven, what's the algorithm gonna say? Oh, not very many people are coming on this listing. I don't have a lot of conversion data. Your total sales are gonna decline, which is what makes this such a double-edged sword and a very hard conversation to have of, yes, you may have to continue running a higher TACOS because cutting back on ads probably isn't the best solution unless you have a very, very strong way to drive additional traffic that's not coming from Amazon advertising.
Mm-hmm. And as we like think about that process, you had a really interesting point in our planning for this episode. You said something like great PPC can sometimes like mask or an organic problem, but something like when your PPC is really good, it's really dialed in, you have a really efficient ACOS, but that doesn't mean your organic is good.
Yeah.
Like if you, and then a little, you know, increase in CPCs come, and all of a sudden total ACOS goes up, and then the hammer might come down on PPC as if like, hey, PPC, what are you doing? My total ACOS is up. But really the good PPC has been masking poor organic sales for some time, which I think is a really interesting concept. Talk more about that. Like, has that happened? Like, how have clients like navigated through that scenario? And also, did I get the scenario right? Like, did I get that right?
You did. So I think one of the reasons that conversation came up is we were talking about what we do when we see a high TACOS. And I had mentioned that, you know, we usually run efficiently. We both understand bid optimization really well. We're usually not over leveraged too much. So when I see a product that has a high TACOS, yes, I do have opportunity to scale back on ads. That could definitely be in consideration, especially if we're running really aggressive campaigns for market share or lifetime value. But the first thing that I kind of recommend is like, go to Amazon and think like a customer. Type in the top 3 to 4 keywords that your customers are probably typing in, and then scroll down the page and see how far down the page you are. I mean, in search, it's incredibly saturated right now. You have a headline search ad, sponsored product placements, editorial recommendations, highly sponsored carousel, video and search ad. All of that is above like the first 50% of the page. So if you're slowly dropping in ranking, like how are customers finding your product? It's probably a sponsored product ad, unless you have a very, very strong external source coming in. So like, I know that knee-jerk reaction is cut in PPC because like that's the easiest asset. Like you can turn off all your PPC and save $10,000 in 24 hours. It's the easiest thing you can do, right? Is to stop your PPC. But I think it's probably one of the most dangerous things you can do long-term unless you have a solution, because again, if you're running your PPC very, very efficiently, it's probably the main source of traffic if you're not ranked well organically, which can cause things to definitely be convoluted when you're looking at your data.
Yeah. And just for those that are unclear on it, you've mentioned over leveraged on your PPC twice now. Can you just break that down, what you mean?
Yeah. So I see pretty frequently where people they just don't have good bid management understanding. So they're bidding really, really high on keywords that they're not converting well on. And they think it's a core keyword. And they think that, there's probably more to PPC than what there is. But in all honesty, it's not that complex. So take super greens, for example. If you're bidding on super greens and you want to be top of search no matter what, and you bid $10, yeah, you're probably going to maybe get top of search with a $10 bid. But if I go in there and see that I'm converting at a 5%, then I would say I'm over leveraged in that campaign. And I need to fix the root problem, which is improving my conversion rate. Why are my customers not converting on my number one keyword? But people think that PPC is a quick fix solution. So they just want to throw more money at it, assuming it's going to fix their problem. And then that's where we see the over leverage. Now, if I went into that super greens campaign and saw a 50% conversion rate, I would say, yes, keep spending $10 on this keyword, because your organic ranking is going to increase over time. It's an algorithm. It's looking at very basic metrics there.
Yeah, which is why looking to connect it back to what you mentioned earlier, the brand metrics is so helpful, because it can help clue you in terms of like, how am I converting relative to my competition?
Because it is very different.
Awesome.
It's very skewed across categories. Like in supplements, we see category average being like 45%. But in apparel or something that has an aesthetic that causes someone to convert, I mean, it can be 10 to 5%. So now that we have that data, it's like the most exciting rollout, I think, in Amazon advertising.
Yeah. The brand metrics, we've talked about it a few times over the last few weeks. It's amazing. Like I'm using it, like if I'm like reviewing an account for the first time, I'm like checking into brand metrics to see how they stack up. Anytime, like we do check-ins periodically where we like check into each other's accounts. Like I'm always looking there to see, like, there's definitely some like really terrific, like health metric. It like baked, like once you connect all these dots, like, okay, conversion rate, like, median conversion rate, top conversion rate, and then like conversion rate into PPC. Like once you start piecing all these things together, I think it gets really, really interesting that you can really develop like a health metric. Like, are we healthy?
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting point too, looking at conversion rate, because I think a misconception that people sometimes have is like, okay, I want to get more aggressive on my PPC to rank more. It's like, okay, terrific, nice. So you get more aggressive. The goal isn't to just go spend a whole bunch more, because I don't have any hard data for this, but I actually think like sometimes people could do themselves a disservice by getting crazy aggressive on keywords that they actually have way below average conversion rates for. And they're almost like shooting themselves in the foot. So when we talk about like getting more aggressive on PPC in order to grow, like activate the positive feedback loop and get more sales into the future, I definitely, it's a phenomenal point. I love the concept and calling it like over leverage, where are we like getting too aggressive on things that we're just like way behind on in terms of conversion rate?
No, I completely agree. And I think I just thought of a good way to explain this possibly. So it's hard when you start
Tell us.
explaining numbers over a podcast, but like, let's say Amazon came out and said, in order to rank at the top four, you need to drive 10 orders a day and you need to convert at a 20% conversion rate for your number one keywords. The right thing to do would be to take your top five keywords, bid really aggressively in exact match, place your bids at top of search, and then look at the data. Am I converting well at that number? Yes. Bid more. Am I not? No. Now, the reason I said 10 orders from a volume perspective is because, like you said, another way to be over leveraged in ads is to increase your bids all across the board. So instead of being strategic and focusing on your top converting keywords, oftentimes people just jack up bids everywhere and you're 100% spot on. They're not looking at their conversion rate. So instead of getting that 10 orders a day on their top keywords, they're only getting 1 to 2 orders a day because they're spread thin across way too many and they don't have the full budget to invest in a ranking strategy. Like, that's another big issue we see. Like, when you're focused on your organic rank, you have to be very precise on those main keywords and you have to go all in on them. If not, then it's just going to take more time because you're not hitting that 10 orders a day to really increase you're doing 3 orders here, 4 orders here. So then finally you do get that maximum number, but it takes more time.
For sure. And also, are you saying that people aren't driving in their cars right now, have a pen and paper on the dashboard, writing down these math? Yes, they're doing the math as we go. They're pulling up their listing on a laptop on the passenger seat. Anyway, drive safe, everyone. So one last concept in the cycle. So as you're looking at, you're tracking Total ACOS now. And we definitely have to mention this quick aside. Any Total ACOS you do per product is still going to be somewhat imperfect. Reason being, you still can't get it perfectly for sponsored brand ads. So there's 2 ways to do it. You pick whatever you think is less bad. The way that I personally like to do it is to take the 3 products that are in the sponsored brands and then divide up the campaign's data between all 3 of them. Imperfect for a number of reasons. One of those could be getting 90% of the traffic for the sponsored brand ad, and you might not know which one it is, and just dividing it up is a big mistake. However, the other option is also imperfect, which I think you prefer. What's the other option?
I want to reiterate what you said real fast because I get questioned on this very, very frequently. It is not possible with our current data set, March 3rd, 2022. Like, Amazon
You cannot do it.
does not give you attributed sales for sponsored brands. Like, sponsored brands is making up 20 or 30% of your sales. That's 30% discrepancy in data. Now, as Michael mentioned,
Yes.
you can assume what that data is. And that was actually the strategy we primarily ran when we only did AMS campaigns, 3 years ago, because it was a little bit
Good old
easier
days.
when you only had landing pages. So when we were primarily relying on landing pages, we would have a minimum number of ASINs and we didn't have a lot of brands targeting top of funnel. So that's exactly what we did. Recently, we've somewhat shifted into just segmenting the data and focusing on sponsored products for TACOS. The reason being is, for example, if I have snowshoes and snow jacket, sometimes we'll bid on winter gear. And it's like, you cannot tell me someone's clicking on winter gear, what ASIN they selected, and like anything top of funnel, anything mid funnel, driving to a store page. They don't give you that data. So we typically break it out, sponsored products, TACOS, and let them know here's your performance on sponsored brands, but it's going to skew your data.
Yes. So literally hear that again, dear listener. If you're using a tool that's telling you Total ACOS, it is fudging the numbers somehow. They're either adding to it or subtracting it somehow because it literally doesn't exist. I mean, think about it. If somebody clicks on a sponsored brand ad, they could go to a page of many products. How would you possibly know which one they reported? Well, I mean, technically they could tell us. Like, I'm sure they could figure it out.
They have it
Right.
somewhere.
Right. But the concept, I mean, the practical reason is if you think about what a sponsored product is, it's like that's the sponsored product. Like they're clicking on one product, whereas a sponsored brand, the ad itself is not refer to as a product ad. It's like a more of a like display addy type thing.
Yeah.
So if you think of like a display ad, which can go anywhere. Oh man, that's a tough one. That's tough. It's very frustrating to have imperfect data to work with.
It's also a hard conversation to have because a lot of people think I'm kind of fudging. Like, in all honesty, it's kind of like, well, so-and-so did it or this tool did it. And then you have to break down, like, look, API, MWS, you cannot pull the data right now. I'm assuming we get it, but.
Right. Between us, I've been on calls with people and they were like, look at my total ACOS over here. I was like, oh, how are you calculating it? They're like, oh, this way. And I was like, oh, okay, what do you do for sponsored brands? They're like, what do you mean? What do I do for sponsored brands? Isn't it in there? I'm like, there's no way. There's no way that you could do it perfectly. Anyway, we can go on and on. This is a good gripe. I like gripes. Sharing gripes, it's a lot of fun. Kvetches. Moving on to the overall. So this plugs into Total ACOS, plugs into an overall how much we are spending to acquire a sale. So talk to us a little bit about how you utilize that on like a basis to make campaigns grow. Like, what is this cost per acquisition and how does it relate to Total ACOS?
Yeah.
In practice.
So fantastic question. Amazon advertising in terms of sponsored products and sponsored brands is limited inventory. If we're just considering the headline search ad and the top 4 placements on the page, everyone is bidding on those placements. So what happens when the market gets more competitive? People bid higher and it becomes much more pay to play. And if you ever dive into your impression share data, if you win that number 1 sponsored product placement all day, you typically win 90% of impression share. So that's a good insight into how much more top of search drives in terms of volume impressions than any other placement on the page. So when we're looking at ranking strategy, it's really important for us to drive that high amount of volume. But if CPCs across the board are getting incredibly, incredibly expensive, we have to start considering where should we spend our money. Should we spend $10 on this placement if we're converting 50%? Maybe. If we're converting 10%, we're going to hemorrhage some money. So it's having that conversation, and maybe we need to move our money elsewhere. I'm always going to be the biggest fan of Amazon because purchase intent is so incredibly high that anyone selecting PPC ads on Amazon have the intent to at least purchase the product until they see the listing. Then that's not on me. But that's where cost per acquisition becomes really, really important, because even though you may convert less driving external traffic, if it's that much cheaper, like we mentioned in the old Google ad days, then maybe that's the opportunity you need to take a look at. Because I mean, I am not going to lie, on Prime Day, we've seen CPCs $40 and people have spent it all day long. And that's because CPG and big retail, all of those brands that have those budgets, they're looking for incremental impressions. They're not concerned with like TACOS.
It's brutal. It's tough. It's tough. One other concept that is new, like one system that's new for us, I know, and this is relatively new, is we found that, to be honest, we just found that our customers love Total ACOS per product. So even though it's a little bit of an imperfect, it's not a little bit of an imperfect metric, it is an imperfect metric to track per product. A cool little system has like revealed itself to us, which is there's been some cool like downstream benefits to having some kind of Total ACOS report per product. Number one, as a PPCer, it helps let the person you're communicating with, like, hey, I'm also interested in profitability. Like we always are, but sometimes whoever we're talking to can start to wonder like, hey, you're talking about this keyword and that bid and this and that and the other thing, but like, what about my profitability? So like Total ACOS is sort of like the PPCer's link into helping a client think about profitability. Yep. So that's been really cool to think about. Another thing that's been really cool to think about is it's helped us find any products we're not advertising. So if there's like a product with like a Total ACOS of 0, that means, wait a second, there's no ads on this thing. So like that's been a really cool benefit of it. And also it helps us, like the process of like finding a product that's maybe a little out of bounds on Total ACOS, and then like going in and seeing where that product is everywhere in the account, and then being able to say, okay, well, in this ad group, in this campaign, this product has like a 60% ACOS. I need to go in there and make some ACOS optimization. Which brings up my last little thing here is like you have to take total ACOS, and then you need to jump over this valley and then optimize based off ACOS. Yeah. Because total ACOS is a product-based metric, which is imperfect. And then you are going into a campaign and you're optimizing on keywords, which you cannot apply a total ACOS to a keyword because that's a keyword-based, you're trying to do a product metric to a keyword, which doesn't compute. So like there's this valley that you have to cross over when you're doing this optimization. So I always say like total ACOS could be like a guideline that like you then go in and say, okay, maybe my ACOSs are too high for a product. Let me go in and find where it's high and then lower it. And then the last thing, I know I said the last one was the last thing. The last thing too, is it can also empower the PPCers to sort of tell the client like, hey, this is clearly an organic issue because, the ACOS is what it is and it's been stable and it's been good and we're appearing in good positions. If we were to go any more aggressive, we would be like hurting the total ACOS and then we'd be hurting profitability. So like the way to improve this product and scale this product is actually going to be through organic optimization. Yeah. And I think that like having the PPC be the PPC and using total ACOS as this like conduit to go back and forth between like paid and organic, I found really fun. So I've been like having a lot of good conversations about all this stuff. So it's been great to begin incorporating this into our reporting.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And kind of circling back to what we said at the beginning of the call, this wasn't needed 4 to 5 years ago because you could have poor PPC and a poor converting listing and probably still do really, really well. You could gain reviews a lot quicker. You could get traction. Now, when everything is as competitive as it is, when the organic side matters as much as it does because you're competing against the number one brands in all of retail, that's why we've had to get better and start just diving into the data even more because every cent counts when you're paying that much for a click. Mm-hmm. So I think you're spot on that. It's definitely looking at the full picture now rather than the segmented aspects that we're all co-managing.
Yes. And I think it'll continue to evolve. When you started that sentence, I could have sworn you said 45 years ago when we started. And I was thinking, wait a second. But Destaney, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I think we've talked good and plenty about total ACOS. Who knows, maybe in another year from now, we'll be recircling on this topic and then continuing to evolve our thoughts. But thank you so much for coming on the show. Of course, everyone knows this, but they can find you at BetterAMS. You're very active on LinkedIn. Always enjoy your content there. Any parting words for Badger Nation?
Nothing but thanks for having me on again and super excited to see what the industry brings this year.
Awesome. Have a good one, Destaney.
Awesome. Thank you.